Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I had no idea what you said, but did she make me sound good? Or did it sound no rubbish? My apologies that I can't speak to you in Dutch. I'll try and speak clearly and not get too excited so that I don't speak it up too much. I do get excited because I think this really matters, what we've gathered together to explore. I'm going to talk to you about the past and end up in the present. They both matter. So it's a real honor to be here in this amazing place. I didn't know it existed until I came yesterday. And to be part of that and to see the special places you have. So I'd like to start with a little bit of history about Christianity. I'm going to say some things, if you're not familiar with these ideas, they'll sound pretty outrageous. Don't believe me. But if you're intrigued, check out the facts. History is something which we understand by checking the facts. And that's really background for what I really want to talk to you about. So I heard what sounded like the mention of my book, The Jesus Mysteries, which was a book I wrote came out in 1999 and went on to be an influential book in this area. And the thesis of that book, which was very revolutionary at the time, now I think it's much more accepted, was that the gospel story, the story we all know of Jesus, is a myth. It's not a historical account to be taken literally, but it's an allegory. The way that I think about that now is to say everybody knows the gospel, the story of the Good Samaritan. So I feel a bit like it's the same as if I came here to a group of people and went, "Hey guys, I've done the research. And you know what? There was no Good Samaritan." And of course, if I did that, you'd be looking at me like, well, you're an idiot, because obviously there's no Good Samaritan. It's a parable. It's a teaching story. The point isn't that there was a guy. The point is, what do you understand from that story? So what I'm suggesting to you is that the whole of the Jesus story is a parable. It was written consciously as a parable, and it grew over actually a long period of time, possibly hundreds of years. The reasons I say that are threefold, really. The first is the ancient pagan mystery religion, which was prevalent throughout the whole of the Mediterranean at the time that Christianity arises. Many different cults, different groups doing different things over an extremely long time, going back to ancient Egypt. And what you find at the center of these mystery cults is a story, a myth, a parable, an allegory which leads to Gnosis, that encodes the teachings of Gnosis. And it's a story of a dying and resurrecting Son of God, or a God-man. And what you find in these stories, whether they're about Osiris or Dionysus or Serapis or Adonis or Attis, you find all of the elements that will later become associated with the figure of Jesus. So this figure is also born of a virgin in front of shepherds in a cave or a stable. He has 12 disciples. He turns water into wine at a wedding and so forth, right up to dying and resurrecting. Sometimes through crucifixion. If you're interested, I haven't got it with me, but if you go to the bookshop when we have at lunchtime and you have a look at the cover of the Jesus Mysteries, you'll see a figure on it which looks like Jesus being crucified, except it's not Jesus. It's this pagan dying and resurrecting God-man. So the whole of the Jesus story in all of its elements as mythology was already in existence for hundreds, thousands actually, of years before the sudden appearance of this story. Now, to make the jump, it requires you to stand out from outside your culture because, of course, if you'd never heard of the Jesus story, ever, and I was here going, hey guys, we've just found an old Gnostic manuscript in a cave in Egypt, and it tells the story of a man who's born of a virgin, walks on water, and comes back from the dead, I suspect most of you would not go, really? That must be true. I suspect most people will go, really? That sounds like a really interesting myth. And it sounds like a myth because it is a myth, in my view. So the first thing that I think has happened here is that we have a continuation of the pagan mystery schools. What I'm saying here, which is why it's controversial, is, if I put it in one line, Christianity is paganism. It's Jewish paganism, or put it in an esoteric context, it's Jewish Pythagoreanism. That's what it is. It's the creation of Jewish Gnostics who've taken the Pythagorean tradition in which they were immersed and turned it into their own thing, just like had been done by the Greeks to create the mysteries of Dionysus or the other mysteries that existed around the Mediterranean. So that's the first reason. The second reason, and I'm not going to go into this, but there is no evidence for an historical Jesus at all. None. The Gospels are faith documents. They're very late. That we know now how they've evolved and changed over time. They are not eyewitness accounts. They had no names attached to them when they were first written. They had no geography in them, the various earliest ones. And also, of course, now we don't just have these 4 Gospels, we now have a huge number of Gnostic Gospels, which were found in Nag Hammadi in Egypt. So suddenly the idea that there's these 4 Gospels, which kind of seem like they're telling the same story, disappears. The reason, by the way, we now know through analysis, the reason that 3 of them at least, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, sound like they're telling the same story is because they're copies of each other. So no surprise they tell the same story. They've been copied from each other. The earliest Christian document we have is actually the genuine letters of Paul. There are also letters which are not genuine, which don't turn up until the 2nd century. But the earliest Christian documents, specifically Christian, are the letters of Paul. Great hero of the Gnostics, actually, the genuine Paul. Regarded as the apostle of the Gnostics. And what's interesting about those letters is they're all written in the Greek of the ancient mysteries. He's clearly an initiate of the mystery schools. And he never mentions an historical Jesus once. He never goes, hey guys, Jesus was born in Bethlehem and he did this and he did nothing. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been around a lot of people who have had recently dead masters. And all they do is talk about things they said and did. Paul does not mention one thing that Jesus said or did. What he mentions is that you can die and resurrect with Jesus and discover the Christ in you. When he comes to announce the secret that has been held from the beginning of time, it is not that Jesus is going to come and die for your sins and blah, blah, blah. The secret is Christ in you. That's the secret. Christ in you. The third and most convincing reason is the Gnostics. Now, I'm aware I'm talking to a group of people, unlike normally when I do this, who actually know who the Gnostics are. If you go back to early Christianity, you get 2 distinct groups. One is what I call literalists, and they are defined by the fact that they believe that Christianity is about an historical Jesus who historically came, who literally died for your sins, and if you believe that that story was true, if you believe that history story was true, you will be saved when you die. That became Roman Catholicism and pretty much every form of Christianity since. Those are the people that selected the texts that make up the Bible. Those are the people who dismissed all the other texts as heretical. And they claimed that the Gnostics were kind of Christians who'd gone pagan, who'd lost their way. History is written by the winners. There was a huge battle in early Christianity, and the Gnostic current was violently suppressed. So we have their story. What myself and Peter Gandy, who I write with, and other academics have done is go back and go, don't listen to the winners, look at the evidence. And I suggest the opposite is the truth. That the Gnostics are the original Christians. And what marks the Gnostics out is that they do not believe that Jesus came in the flesh. This was their great heresy. Why? Because the Gospels are actually about you. They're about the initiate's journey to Gnosis in a story form, which is what had been going on in the pagan mysteries for hundreds of years. We have interesting little footnotes from the early Christians, especially the literalists, because we have more of their stuff. But we have them saying things like there's a letter of Polycarp which complains that the whole universe is full of Gnostics. There's another letter, a document to Tullian, I think it is, who says the vast majority of Christians do not believe that Jesus came in the flesh. That's really interesting, isn't it? Right at the very beginning, so 2nd century, 3rd century, the vast majority at that time do not believe that Jesus came in the flesh. Now, of course, it's a completely opposite way around. And they are very aware of the similarities between the Jesus story and pagan myths. How could they not be? So we have, for instance, Justin Martyr, very early proto-literalist, who has to deal with this, and what they do is they actually make an appeal to the pagan world going, accept us, Christians, because we tell the same story. We're the same as you. Except they have this twist. As it becomes literalized, as it becomes made about history, they use that as their... You've got to imagine the ancient world like today. Around that time, you've got a whole hodgepodge of different cults and like the New Age movement. Like everything's going on. Some of it's really deep, some of it's a bit nutty. A whole spectrum of things. And they're competing for a space. And what their particular angle is, you told the story of the dying, resurrecting God-man, but here it actually happened. So their angle is, the devil came and spread the story of Jesus before he came to confuse everyone when he did come. So that's one explanation. I still hear that today. My explanation as an historian is to say, no, I don't think that's what happened. I think what's happened here is an evolutionary process of ideas, like always. So my guess, and I'm just going to say this out and go straight there, is that we have the Gospels, the proto-Gospels, what will become the Gospels, and the whole Gnostic movement, starting probably in Alexandria in Egypt, which is the New York of the ancient world, full of Jews. They now speak Greek. There's nothing not in Greek. All the Christian documents are in Greek. All of them. It's a Greek phenomenon. They're in Alexandria. It's in Egypt. They're surrounded by this massive, ancient, wise culture of the ancient mysteries. They have the very powerful mysteries of Serapis happening. That's going right back to Osiris. We have schools in the desert, such as the Therapeutae. The Therapeutae, we know about the Therapeutae through a man called Philo Judaeus, who is clearly a member or part of this group. It's a Jewish group. It's following the mysteries of Moses, which they see the story of Exodus as an allegory, not to be taken literally, but an allegory of coming to Gnosis. Gnosis is the promised land. So you go through this process, which is wandering in the desert and all the rest of it, until you finally end up in the promised land. Now we also know that Philo is called Philo the Pythagorean. These Jewish mystics, these Jewish Gnostics, are practicing the mysteries of Moses, but they are Pythagoreans. They dress in white, they're vegetarians, they treat women well, all the things that characterizes as equals. So it's all the things which characterize the Pythagoreans. So you have a Jewish Pythagorean school. And then what comes out from that period in Alexandria is a story of Jesus or Joshua. Well, in the mysteries of Moses, Moses dies. Moses doesn't get to the promised land. Joshua takes you to the promised land. And what we have here is a joining together of this myth of Joshua with the myth of the dying and resurrecting God-man. And you get this incredible new allegory, which will just take the world by storm. Because what it's got is, it's because it's embodied in this narrative. Now, the narrative's not there straight away, The earliest documents are not set anywhere, all the geography is added later, and by someone who'd never been to Palestine, because the geography's wrong. But a story is fleshed out. Just like in the Dionysian mysteries, you had it done in play form. You go and see a play, a drama. That's what they were. That's where drama comes from. Paul talks about watching Christ being hundreds and hundreds of people in Asia, watching Christ die and resurrect. So clearly they were also enacting this as a passion play. So, mythology. Now I'd like to say something about the Gnosis, and then I want to return to the story and just put it in the story for a second. Too long on history. God, never going to get up to now. Look, the Gnosis, look, every Gnostic group, there were no Gnostics. There were lots and lots of different groups. We call them Gnostics. They did not call themselves Gnostics. We retrospect that on them. There were just lots and lots of different groups, and they all thought different things. And some of them I like, some of them I don't like. Some of them seem nutty as crazy. Other of them say, whoa, wonderful. They're all different. Underneath it all, though, there is something simple and universal, and that's what I'm interested in. My guiding light in all the studies I've done of the mystical traditions of the world is that fundamentally they are all looking at this moment right now and trying to see what it is. That's what they're doing. And what they're trying to point to ultimately starts from this moment, can go off into wild esoteric fantasies, but needs to come back to this moment to understand what this is. So when I look at this moment, I see that what they're talking about is the nature of who we are. And the words they have, the Greek words, are physis, psyche, or psyche, as we would say now. Physis, psyche, pneuma are the three elements of what we are: body, soul, and spirit. And what they're pointing at is what is obvious in the moment. They're pointing at your nature right now, which you can see directly, which is that you have a physical form, your body. Then there's another dimension of experience happening right now, which is not in space. It has no concrete form. It's what we would call the imagination, the mind, the psyche, or the soul. Everything's happening right now for you. You know, your bodies are nicely, politely being still. Mine isn't, but yours are. And it's all happening in psyche or soul. That's where all the action is. So that's it. Here we are. That's what we are. We're body and soul. That's obvious. And then there's spirit. And the Gnosis is about coming to see spirit. And spirit, it means essence. Essence from the Latin esse, to be. Being, it's your being. And the key teaching in Gnosticism, as in all the spiritual traditions, I believe, is that your spirit has no form. It is a formless presence which is witnessing this flow of form that you're experiencing right now. It has no form because you can't see it, because it's what's looking. Well, let me quote from the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of my favorite Gnostic Gospels, where Jesus is revealing this Gnosis to his students, and he says, I will show you what cannot be seen, what cannot be heard, what cannot be touched, and what cannot be imagined. What he's pointing to is our deepest identity as spirit, which is the formless presence, which has no color, but which is witnessing color, which makes no noise, but which is listening to sound. It's the thing which is before body and soul, which is witnessing body and soul. And it has no form, so it's nowhere and everywhere. The analogy which I love, which the Gnostics use, as of course do so many traditions, is that spirit is like the dreamer of the dream of life. So just as in a dream, your essential nature as the dreamer has no form in the dream. The person you appear to be in the dream is your dream form. But as the dreamer, the whole of the dream is arising within you, and you are a formless presence of awareness or spirit within which the dream is arising. Plotinus says something really interesting, the Neoplatonist. He says, people think that the soul is in the body, but that's ridiculous because the body is in the soul. Which is an interesting thing, and here's what I think he means. See, if you look at this moment now, there's two ways that you can look at it. You can reach out into it and go, what is it? And that's science, basically. That's what science does. It reaches out into the forms and goes, what is it? What is it? What is it? And then there's the other direction, which is what mysticism or Gnosticism does, and that goes, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? One is objective exploration of reality. One is a subjective exploration of reality. And which way you go depends on which philosophy you'll end up with. If you go that way, you end up going, everything which exists is an object, and subjects just come and go. And if you go back into the subject, you go, everything's arising within pure mind, and objects are just forms. And they're just arising from which way you look at it. They're kind of mirrors of each other. So if you look at it from the outside and you look at me and you're aware that I'm experiencing this intangible, non-spatial soul thing, you're going to go, it looks like it's in Tim's head. But if if I had a big zip in my head and I could zip and say, Peter, can you pull out my soul? It's not going to happen because it's not in there. What's in there is object. What's in there is clever porridge. What's in there is not a soul. So from the outside, it looks like the soul is in the body. But look from your subjective point of view. If you come back into spirit, if you come back into that presence of awareness, which is witnessing this, you are witnessing one flow of experience. And for the deep Gnostic teachings, as I've come to understand them, is that flow of experience, that's the dream of you. And that's your soul. Your soul isn't something separate from your life. It is your life. That's what your soul is. And within that, within the dream of Tim, there's this guy. Inside the dream of Tim, I appear as this. Meeting you inside the dream of you, appearing as that. And we're inside each other's dreams. Why? Because, and this is the central teaching of Gnosticism, as it is of all traditions, because when you step back into spirit, there's one of us. There's one dreamer of many dreams. So that we're both separate and not separate from each other. That's the big, oh my God, there's one of us. Why? Well, because we're formless. How can you have many formlessnesses? There's no barriers. Spirit is just is. The way that they thought of it was, they used a Pythagorean symbol, which you may know, which it was kind of on the thing outside. So if you imagine a circle, can you see my circle? With a point in the middle and a radius. So they went, look, the circle, on the outside, the circumference is the body. And then the inside, going back, the radius, that's the soul. So the body's what the soul looks like, one of them says. The body's what the soul looks like. And then you go back in, and there's all soul, all these depths of soul, and you go back into yourself, and the deeper you go, and then you hit the center, which is a point. And of course, in geometry, by definition, a point has no dimensions. It's formless. And you hit the point inside you. Oh, and then you're everywhere. But then they imagined it like this. Instead of one radius, they imagined infinite radii coming back into the one center. And then he went, you are one of those radii, and I'm another one. So on the circumference out here, I'm a separate body to you, and we go back, and we're a separate soul, and we get to my center, and your center is the same center. That when we find the deepest thing in each other, and when we see the deepest thing in each other, we find that behind the separateness, we are also one. That is what the Gnostics called the discovery of the Christ in you. Because what they meant by the Christ was exactly what the pagans meant by the Dionysius in you. Or indeed the Hindus mean by the Atman. Or I think the Buddhists by the Buddha nature. That there is a place we can find which is our own deepest being, which is the deepest being of all. Clement of Alexandria says, knowing yourself is the greatest of all things, because when you know yourself, you know God. And of course, the great mystic heresy in every tradition is, you are God. Why? There's only God. There's nothing else. There's nothing else you can be. This is God's dream, or many dreams. Let me just root that very quickly into the gospel story with something to hang that in for you. Okay, we'll do beginning and end. The whole allegory is rich with teachings, the whole way through, as you would expect. Plotinus describes Christianity, so he's quite, fairly early, describes Christianity as being about the ascent from the cave. No one said that to me at Sunday school. No one said, Tim, this is about the ascent from the cave. What's he talking about? It starts in a cave. We get a stable, but it's not a stable, it's a cave. And in some of the Gnostic versions, it's clearly a cave. And Jesus is born as a being of light. Let's go back a little bit further. Let's go back to the star. The Gnostic teaching goes right back to Egypt, is that everyone is really a star. You're a star. Now, for us, that sounds a bit nutty because they're big gaseous balls of exploding energy. What does that possibly mean? They didn't see it like that. What they saw was the night sky with lots of pinpricks in it. Little holes, beyond which was the kingdom of light. And you could see the light coming through. What they were saying is, you are a hole in the canopy. And when I look in your eyes, I connect with the being of light. I connect with consciousness looking back at me in another form. You seem like a form, but you're not really, are you? Really, you're something that has no form. And you're connecting now to me as something that has no form, and I'm reaching through to you through all this funny noises to try and connect with you as something which has no form, so we can really touch each other in this huge mystery we're in. So he starts as a star. So what happens with Jesus? Big star. Really big star. And in the Gnostic version, they're all Gnostic versions, but one of them, there's a big explosion of light in the cave. The cave is Plato's cave, or really it's Pythagoras' cave. In the ancient world, if you said the cave, any esotericist, any mythologist would know you were talking about Pythagoras' cave. It'd be like if I said to you now, can you feel the Force? You'd know I was talking about Star Wars. I wouldn't have to tell you, well, it's a film, and you'd know that. And they would know that. It's the cave. Why? Because of the canopy. That's the cave. We're inside the cave. Look at the night sky. You're in the cave. And reality, the kingdom of light is outside the cave. And that's what the whole of Plato's myth is about. There's much more on that, but I'll have to leave it. So he's born in a cave. He's born of a virgin. The virgin mother is the goddess who recycles. She's the goddess of justice. She recycles soul into reincarnation. She's she of the left-hand path. So she brings souls back into reincarnation. So there's the Virgin Mother outside the cave bringing Jesus in. That's you coming in. The story then goes through to the key moment, which was actually the beginning of the earlier story, which is the baptism. Baptism is the first level of initiation. Paul talks about two initiations, the psychic or soul initiation, the pneumatic or spiritual initiation. The first one is baptism, and you enter a phase then when you enter into the spiritual life, which is about purification. Purifying the soul, this bit, the thing that's thinking and feeling and all this bit. What makes you you, your personal bit. You've got to purify that, get it ready. Then he goes through, he gives all the teachings for that period. He gathers his disciples around him, the 12 disciples, which are the 12 signs of the zodiac. Also the wheel of grief, or the wheel of karma, as it is, people know it as from the East. Pythagoras calls it the wheel of grief, that the soul is on, going round and round. That's the 12 disciples. In some of the Gnostic texts, he sits in the middle of that circle and they dance around him and sing. He gives the teachings, which I'll end up with. Amazing teaching, Sermon on the Mount, all this stuff, which is about how you become a better person. And then it goes through, and then you find him right at the end, and he's coming into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And he's hailed as the great king. The donkey is Set, which is the animal side of your nature. He has mastered the animal side of his nature. If you know Zen, I think it's the 10 bulls story. Same. He comes in, and then, of course, the whole thing turns upside down. He seems like he's the king. He's arrived. The Christ just means king, by the way. That's all it means, really. He's the king. And it all turns inside out. He's betrayed. Everything messes up. And he dies. He's crucified. He's put to death. And that is the pneumatic initiation. That's when you discover on the spiritual journey, oh my God, I'm really getting the hang of this. I'm really turning into somebody. I'm, got the hang of the whole spiritual thing. And I know how to dress. I know how to talk. I know how to give the appearance of being spiritual. And then it dawns on you that actually what has to happen is you have to die to yourself and be reborn into the Christ within you. You have to give yourself up to something bigger, which is oneness, which is love, and be transformed. And he does that through the crucifixion. Now, interesting, in some of the Gnostic versions, you have this amazing figure known as the laughing Jesus. So that whilst Jesus is on the cross in agony, having been betrayed by all his friends and everything, the real Jesus, or the deeper Jesus, is in a cave of light, laughing. Pretty confronting image, but... and saying, look, I seem to suffer, but I do not suffer, because I discriminate what I appear to be from what I am. Which is full on. But that's a very powerful message for the Gnostics from this mythology. And we go through, and of course then it ends with a cave. Mary Magdalene, who I'm not even going to get into this, but just as a little taster to sell my books, they didn't just take the pagan myth of the dying and resurrecting God-man, they also took the pagan myth of the lost and redeemed goddess. So it's not just father and son, it's also mother and daughter. And in the Gnostic tradition, she is hugely important. Usually called Sophia, she has many, many names. Hugely important. And in the Gospels, she's represented the higher and lower Sophia. The fallen and redeemed woman is Mary Magdalene, and the Virgin Mary. The two Marys are the same figure of Sophia, which is Demeter and Persephone. I won't go into it. You'll have to check it out. But she represents the soul. So Jesus represents spirit. She represents soul. And she comes to the tomb, back to the cave. But now the cave is empty. Now the cave is empty. He's not there. If you remember in the myth, before that, the veil of the temple is ripped in two. The veil in the temple at that time was a tapestry of the stars. It was an astrological tapestry. So what has happened? Jesus has ripped open the appearances and gone back to the treasure house of light. And Paul says he has conquered the cosmos. He has conquered the cosmos. What does that mean? It means what you do right now, this instant, if you have your being outside of the forms. If instead of having your being inside of the forms, you have your being outside of the forms, so that this is arising within you like a dream, you have conquered the cosmos. And this is being represented symbolically in this amazing myth. So he is now out. But of course, what's so wonderful about the Jesus story is it doesn't end there. He comes back. He comes back into embodiment. And for me, that is one of the great things about Christianity. There's always been, in all traditions, a negative and a positive gnosis. And you get it in Christianity too. The negative gnosis goes here, this place. This is somewhere to get away from. This is punishment for bad karma, your sins, it's some error, it's a mistake, it's a trap, it's an illusion, you're not really who you think you are, it's all bad, kill that, get away. That's the negative gnosis, been very popular throughout history, still is. Then there's the positive gnosis, and the positive gnosis goes, no, 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 no. This is the means by which we come to know ourselves, and the whole point is to wake up to that profound spirit, that oneness, and bring it back into the world. To bring it into the world. And that's the one that I relate to. And I relate to that because, and this is the other thing which I'm going to end on, and I don't know whether we'll have some chance to have some questions, but is that the key centerpiece of Christianity, which is the bit it brings. All these traditions bring something else. It brings love. It really brings love. The experience of oneness and separateness together is love. That's what it is. When we know we're separate and not separate, there's this love. And what I see right at the center of Christianity is the teachings you get in the mouth of Jesus, where this guy, this heretic, they are bad people. They're breaking all the rules, the Gnostics. They're not comfortable people. They don't play the game. He comes in, in the story, he's thrown everyone out of the temple. He's called, the religious authorities hate him so much they kill him. He doesn't give a damn about that. He doesn't. He's got bigger things on his mind. And he comes into a world dominated by Jewish literalist religion in which there are hundreds and hundreds of rules. God really doesn't like shellfish, and he doesn't like the end of your foreskin, and he doesn't like, there's a whole load of things he just doesn't like, you've got to get rid of. And things you do and don't do, and on this day, on that day. And Jesus comes in and goes, there are 2 commandments. And the second one is pretty much like the first. Whew. That's radical stuff. That's going, get the simple essence of this, guys. Just get the simple essence. What are those 2 things? One is love God. Well, God is the Spirit. God is the one. God is where we are all the same. God is the great mind within which this is all arising. Be one with that. Love that. And then the second, which is much like the first, love others as yourself. Because when you know that we're all one, they are yourself. That's what they are. Which can lead to the line which, to me, is, I do not know of another line like this in the whole of literature. I don't know what Gnostic wrote it or where it first came from. But it's at the center of the Gnostic Christian tradition. And it's this: love your enemies. Wow. Oh my God. Love love everyone. Well, everyone, yes. Enemies? Love your enemies. That is agape, it was the Greek word they used. That is a love so big, so radical. So my feeling is we need right now to not to go back to what was. What we need to do now, in my humble opinion, is have the courage to be like they were. All of these people, whether the Gnostics, the early Chan people, whether they're the early Rosicrucians, these are people who are revolutionary. These are people who reinvented this knowledge, this gnosis, for their own time. And how do they do that? They did it by being eclectics. They took from everywhere. This is why this meeting is so great with all of these different traditions. They went, let's take from everywhere. That's what marked them out. Look, certainly Christian Gnostics, I'll have a bit of that and a bit of that. They're making up their own thing. Everyone's got the gnosis in a way appropriate to themselves, Theodosius says. No one can tell you you've got it or you haven't got it. It's not like that. And what we need, it feels to me now, is to have the courage between us somehow to reinvigorate this in a way which makes it happening now. So it means capturing the essence. And the simple essence to me is, look, body, see it, soul, see it, spirit, see it, got it. What does that lead to? Love. Right, that's the whole thing done. Great. Now, geez, I'll give up my life to trying to work out how to live that, because that's a big order. So my hope is that, and why it's such a privilege to come and talk to you, is that what we're involved here is a collective endeavor to create a new esotericism for the 21st century. One that can meet the challenge of science, of being rational, of being experiential, of being experimental even. but which can keep this ancient truth alive in its new form. Because the perennial philosophy has not stayed still through history. It has changed and evolved, and it must do so again. And we are the people to make that happen. So I've been talking about the past. If you're interested in my own endeavors to bring this into a new form, you'll find my recent books, which are all about that. I do events. I'm doing one in Holland. In September. I'm doing one in England, in Glastonbury, where I live, in July, where I want to take people to this simple, direct experience of Gnosis, so they feel the love. To me, that's the telltale sign. Is simply that. For me, if your heart is, you got it. It's like that's what I'm interested in, and it's really available to us. It really is. It really is. So if you're interested, there's some leaflets. Check that out. And I'm around. I'm not going to be understanding what everyone says, but if you can speak English to me, I'd be delighted to talk to you and to answer any questions and to make the most of our time together, because it's been so lovely to be here. Do we have time for questions, or am I done? I don't have time for questions now, but it'll be later. Thank you for your kind attention.